From 1605 to 1607, King Christian IV sent 3 expeditions from Denmark to find the long-lost Viking colonies of Greenland. Nothing had been heard from these settlements for over a century, but the king was still confident that they would be there, and they would speak the Old Norse language. The first expedition dodged icebergs around the southern coast of Greenland and found only Inuit settlements on its western coast. The second expedition tried looking for precious metals in Greenland, but it brought back only worthless rocks. The third and final expedition in 1607 was even more disappointing. One of its 2 ships was driven off course by a storm. The other ship came just close enough to spy the glaciers of western Greenland, but it never made land. Even in midsummer, the ice around Greenland was, to quote one description, piled so high that it resembled great cliffs. The captain of the expedition came back to Copenhagen to tell the king that his mission was impossible. The Danish expeditions never found the Viking colonies, of course, because they had already vanished more than a century before. Their fate has invited curiosity from historians and from archaeologists ever since. We'll never know exactly what happened to them, but modern archaeology and climate history have provided new clues. When the Vikings first settled Greenland back in the 10th century, the world was a slightly warmer place. Greenland was never really green, but fjords in the southeast and southwest of the island provided shelter for 2 modest colonies with their sheep, their goats, and a few cattle. They relied on their livestock, and on seal and walrus hunting, and on occasional trade with the Scandinavian mainland. Yet the colonies were always vulnerable. Their land was remote and cold, it was bare of trees and fuel. It was unable to support crops, and even in good times, it was scarcely able to sustain enough pasture for their livestock. Colonists faced competition from the Inuit, who had arrived in Greenland around the same time as the Vikings, but they came with better adapted technologies, including kayaks and harpoons, for fishing and for whaling. The Viking colonists struggled to uphold a way of life brought from a distant homeland with a different environment. They adapted enough to keep alive for generations, without losing their sense of identity and community. They supported families, churches, and communities on Greenland, and even a brief settlement on Newfoundland. Yet after 3 centuries, it seems the Little Ice Age made their difficult way of life all but impossible. It was already challenging to keep livestock alive through Greenland's long winters, especially to find enough food for people and for animals during late winter and early spring. Ice cores drilled from Greenland's glaciers indicate that there were colder years with shorter growing seasons during the 14th and 15th centuries. Now, there are many reasons the Greenland colonists might have died out or moved away. The close fit between some of the coldest decades shown in these ice core records and the most likely dates for the expiration of the colonies offers some explanation for when and how Viking Greenland eventually came to an end. The Little Ice Age in Greenland may have pushed these colonies beyond their limits. But what was it like for Nordic communities who survived the Little Ice Age? What was it like to live through a time of changing seasons and exceptional cold? In this lesson, we're looking at experiences of the Little Ice Age, what they help us understand about the past, and how they might also help us think about experiences of global warming today. In late medieval and early modern Europe, life was closely tied to the rhythm of the seasons. One way to see this connection is to look at historical calendars and almanacs. As an example, let's take the famous illustrations from the Trévicheur, a 15th century French manuscript. Each month in this book has a picture representing the annual cycle of farming activities and religious holidays. In February, people huddle indoors by the fire. But in March, they're back outside, preparing the fields for sowing. By June, they are mowing to make the first hay. And then July brings the first harvest. In November, pigs are taken to forage in the woods. But in January, they're roasted for the New Year's feast. From late medieval and early modern Scandinavia, we also have a special kind of calendar that illustrates the rhythm of the seasons. These are primstavs, or runic calendars, carved into staves of wood. Their symbols mark an annual cycle of religious holidays, which became associated with agricultural and foraging activities, like when to fish or when to prepare the land. Now, it seems most people experience the Little Ice Age, above all, as a disruption to the kinds of seasonal rhythms captured in the primstav. Only rarely did people before the 18th century understand that they were living through a period of climatic change. People had to rely on their memories and the memories of the oldest men and oldest women in their communities to try to compare past and present weather. Very few observers kept careful records that could enable them to identify changes in temperatures. One of those who did, the Swiss scholar Renvart Suzat, wrote in the year 1600, and I quote here, "For some time now, the years have shown themselves to be more rigorous and severe than in the past, and deterioration among creatures, not only among mankind and the world of animals, but also the earth's crops and produce, has been noticed. In addition to extraordinary alterations of the elements, stars, and winds. Through keeping calendars like primstavs, and then noticing when the symbols no longer aligned with the seasons to act, populations may have started to realize that patterns of everyday life and the weather were changing." We find this sense of disruption to seasonal rhythms, for instance, in plays of William Shakespeare. In his play, A Midsummer Night's Dream, written in England during the cold and hungry 1590s, one of the characters laments that the seasons alter, the hoary-headed frosts fall in the fresh lap of the crimson rose, and old Hyam's thin and icy crowned. An odorous chaplet of sweet summer buds is as in mockery set. The spring, the summer, the chiding autumn, angry winter, change their wonted liveries, and the mazed world by their increase now knows not which is which. Also in Shakespeare's time, dozens of popular pamphlets were printed, describing events like extraordinary floods and frosts in England. In the Netherlands, freezing winters caught the attention of artists, as did the new pastime of ice skating. In the Nordic countries, of course, ways of life were already adapted to longer, colder winters. Some of our best descriptions of these ways of life during the early Little Ice Age come from the History of the Northern Peoples, written by Olaus Magnus, whose illustrations we have used throughout these lessons. Olaus Magnus was sent to Rome in 1524, and he lived most of his life in southern Europe. There, it seems, he enjoyed telling people about the strange and ingenious ways that Nordic people survived their cold climate. As he wrote, the nations of a hot or temperate zone are clearly quite free from frost, cold, snow, rime, ice, and howling winter storms. They can hardly grasp the diversity of skills, facilities, and appliances with which those who live in the bitter cold of the north defend themselves and make arrangements to deal with severities of this kind. His history records, for instance, how children set up great snow castles and snowball fights in the winter, how people set up markets and camps on the ice, the many tools used to carve and shatter the ice, and how communities above the Arctic Circle continued to work by moonlight and lamplight through the long Arctic night, how they celebrated with the return of the sun in spring. Olaus Magnus's descriptions also give us some idea of the diversity of ways that people lived through the Little Ice Age in the north. While farming was important, Magnus also gives us details about fishing, hunting, and ways of preserving meat. He describes how people made use of forest resources. The practice of swidden agriculture, for instance, that meant burning patches of forest and using ashes to fertilize the soil, It became an increasingly important way for Finns to grow grains, where conditions were marginal for agriculture. Timber and tar also became important exports, especially from Finland. Magnus's history describes how people traveled in the woods on snowshoes and on skis to hunt, trap, and trade furs. He gives descriptions, too, of how indigenous peoples lived through the winters. Furthermore, we can see some imprints of the Little Ice Age in elements of popular culture in Nordic countries. For example, before newspapers became widespread, so-called broadside ballads were often used to sing the news and inform the public about disasters and tragedies. The ballad you see here concerns the famine years of 1772 and 1773. It reveals the terrible consequences of hunger, in this case, a mother who murdered 4 of her children because she could no longer feed them. The song blames the cold-hearted neighbors as much as the cold weather or the desperate mother for her tragedy.
Med sorg och trang vi strider och ingen dag fri. Just norren vær for